April 18th, 1967. Central Mekong Delta, South Vietnam. The sun hadn't yet risen, but the swamp was already awake, buzzing, croaking, churning, with unseen life beneath the surface. The air was thick enough to taste laced with mud cordite, and the distant echo of M60 fire from a night ambush somewhere upriver. First Lieutenant James Harlow pushed aside a curtain of dangling nipa palm leaves as he crouched near the riverbank rifle slung tight helmet, dripping with condensation. His platoon, Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 60th Infantry Regiment, had orders to cross this narrow tributary before dawn and link up with a mechanized unit stalled on the other side. But the river didn't look like a river. It looked like a living thing, a slow brown breathing mass, and something beneath it occasionally rippled the surface, just enough to make the men stiffen, weapons raised, jaws clenched. Jesus. Look at that water, Private O'Malley muttered behind Harlow. The kid had only been in country for 3 weeks, but he already knew that any river crossing in Vietnam came with 2 threats, the ones shooting at you, and the ones waiting under the surface to drag you down. Keep it quiet, Harlow whispered. We move in 5. The men checked their gear, M16s, wrapped in plastic sleeves, ammo bandoliers raised high to stay dry, rucksacks cinched tight. The point man, Sergeant Victor Ruiz, scanned the opposite bank through night vision goggles that flickered and struggled against the early morning humidity. No movement, no muzzle flashes, no silhouettes, just silence. Harlow stepped forward and dipped the tip of his boot into the river. It wasn't cold, it was warm, almost feverish. The mud sucked at his foot and pulled with a slow, hungry strength. Behind him, the platoon waited nerves taut. Sir Ruiz asked quietly, "We doing this?" Harlow nodded. Ruiz waded in first water, rising up his legs, soaking fatigue swirling around him. The other men followed in 2 staggered columns, hands gripping each other's straps to keep their formation tight. The river swallowed their legs immediately, soft mud shifting sand and something else moving past them, with a slick, unnatural speed. None of them spoke. None of them breathed too loudly. Every man listened for the splash of an enemy swimmer, the crack of a rifle, or the sudden thrash of something in the murk. Halfway across the water was up to their chests. Harlow raised his M16 above his head and took another step. Something brushed his thigh. Not mud, not a fish, something thicker, muscular, alive. He froze. "Hold," he whispered. The platoon stopped instantly. Even the river seemed to hesitate, ripples flattening. Ruiz turned slowly. "Sir, you good?" But Harlow didn't answer immediately. Whatever touched him drifted back in the darkness, invisible, but very, very real. His pulse hammered against his helmet straps. Then another man jerked violently. "God, something bit me." Corporal Dwayne Lister gasped, kicking instinctively as water splashed around him. "Stay still," Ruiz hissed, gripping the man's shoulder. Lister winced. Teeth clenched. "It's on my leg. Something's on my damn leg." And then it happened again, this time to Private O'Malley. The young soldier's whole body spasmed like he'd grabbed a live wire. It shocked me." Men flinched, panic rising like a wave. They weren't imagining it. They weren't hallucinating. Something in the water was attacking them fast, biting, and unbelievably electrifying. Harlow felt the current next. A jolt shot through his calf, sharp, vibrating, numbing. Not enough to incapacitate him, but enough to terrify him. Ruiz cursed under his breath. "Sir, what the hell is in this river?" Before Harlow could reply, the water around them erupted into a frenzy of splashes. Shapes writhed beneath the surface, long, sinuous, eel-like. Shadows twisted around the men's legs, darting between them, brushing against their gear. "Eels," someone shouted. "They're eels!" But these weren't like any eels from back home. These were bigger, meaner, quicker, and some of them impossibly discharged bursts of crackling energy as they struck. Harlow steadied his breathing. This wasn't an ambush. This wasn't the Viet Cong. This was the Delta itself, fighting back. "Listen up," he barked through the chaos. "Nobody fires. You hear me? Keep moving, slow, steady, don't thrash. But Lister was already losing control, kicking wildly as another shock hit him. The river churned as more shadows closed in. "Sir, they're coming up from the bottom," O'Malley cried. Harlow took another step, forcing his way through the muddy resistance. His legs trembled as another eel brushed past, but he held firm. "Move," he commanded, 1 foot at a time. The platoon pushed forward, but the attacks intensified sharper bites, stronger shocks, more splashing shapes circling beneath them. The far bank suddenly felt miles away, and the river, alive and hungry, seemed determined to keep them. The river felt tighter now, narrower than it had moments earlier, as if the muddy banks themselves were closing in around Bravo Company. The men strained forward, but every step sank deeper, every movement dragged more sluggishly, as if the Delta didn't just want to hurt them, it wanted to hold them. Lieutenant Harlow gritted his teeth as another jolt shot up his left leg. Short, quick, like a spark leaping from a stripped wire. His muscles twitched involuntarily, but he forced himself not to kick or thrash. Any sudden movement only made the eels strike harder. He learned that from the last shock. "Eyes up," Ruiz hissed beside him, voice tight. "Keep moving." But Harlow wasn't looking forward anymore. He was staring at the water directly beneath him. The faintest movement rippled there, fast curling streaks that disappeared just as quickly. Slender bodies, maybe 2 feet long, maybe 3. Impossible to tell in the swirling mud. The men trudged through the water in a tight, wobbling line. Some struggled just to stay upright. Corporal Lister limped heavily, his soaked fatigues clinging to his leg where one eel had bitten deep. Blood diluted instantly into the current. "Something's wrapping around my boot," Lister growled, trying not to panic. Ruiz leaned toward him. "Don't kick, just slide your foot forward." Lister tried. The mud beneath him shifted and sucked, and something alive coiled once around his ankle before slipping away. He shuddered violently. Private O'Malley wasn't doing any better. His breathing was ragged, shallow. "Lieutenant, they keep coming at me. They're in the mud. I can feel them moving down there. Keep your weapon above water," Harlow ordered, voice low and calm despite the fear gnawing at his gut. "Just keep going." Slow, controlled. A sudden splash broke the line's rhythm. Then another, like stones thrown from below the surface. The platoon froze as dozens of dark, slick shapes erupted from the water around them, twisting in arcs before splashing back down. Some brushed against torsos. Others snapped toward belts, boots, and dangling straps. "Holy hell!" Private Cooper shouted as one eel slapped against his chest, sending a shock pulsing through his vest. Harlow steadied himself as another streaking shape brushed his ribs. He hissed through clenched teeth, "Do not fire. I don't care if one crawls up your damn sleeve. Do not fire." The danger wasn't just the eels, it was the riverbank ahead. Just beyond the far side, morning light began creeping through the foliage, revealing the faint outline of bamboo stakes driven into the shoreline. Fresh, sharpened, and angled outward. Punji stakes. The Viet Cong had prepared the crossing point. "They knew we'd take this route," Ruiz muttered grimly. "Of course they did." Harlow scanned the tree line. No movement, no muzzle flashes. But the silence felt wrong, too intentional. He sensed eyes watching from behind the palms and brush. Sir Ruiz whispered they might be waiting for us to panic, to fire weapons, to make noise, to turn the eel swarm into the least of their problems. Another shock hit Harlow's thigh, harder this time. The muscles spasmed violently, and his M16 nearly slipped from his grasp. He caught it just in time. From behind him, another soldier cried out, "Get it off! Get it off me!" Private Jenkins flailed instinctively as an eel clamped onto his calf. The electric jolt made him jerk violently. Harlow spun. Jenkins stopped moving. But Jenkins couldn't stop. The current surging through his leg hit him again harder, and he slipped. His head went under. Water splashed violently as he thrashed. O'Malley lunged toward him, grabbing the strap on Jenkins's vest. "I've got him." More eels surged toward the commotion drawn by the movement. "Lift him," Ruiz barked. O'Malley heaved upward, pulling Jenkins's head above water. The young soldier gasped, coughing mud and river water. His face was pale, almost gray. Harlow reached him next, grabbing his shoulder. "Stay upright, don't go under again." Jenkins nodded shakily, breathing hard. The whole platoon paused chest-deep in water, surrounded by unseen predators, and the creeping threat of an enemy ambush waiting on the far shore. The Mekong Delta felt alive, watching, listening. Every ripple and splash seemed amplified in the humid dawn air. Harlow forced himself to look forward again. Just 50 more feet. 50 feet of water filled with biting, shocking eels. 50 feet to reach a shoreline rigged for a kill zone. "Bravo, company," he said quietly. Voice carrying over the water, "We are getting out of this river." He took one step, then another, and the whole platoon moved with him, inch by inch, into a tightening gauntlet of mud, electricity, and fear. The riverbed shifted again beneath the men's boots, as if something massive had stirred deep in the mud. Harlow felt it, through the soles of his drenched jungle boots, a long, dragging vibration that pushed a tremor through the water. It wasn't just the small eels anymore. Something larger was moving. Sarui's whispered, eyes narrowing at the rippling water ahead. That wasn't the little ones. Before Harlow could answer, the surface, just 10 feet in front of them, bulged upward. A long, dark shape twisted below thick enough to displace a mound of mud and silt. The men tightened their grips, forming an uneasy cluster behind their lieutenant. Private Cooper let out a sharp breath. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." The shape vanished as quickly as it appeared. The water stilled. Then, in the blink of an eye, the river exploded. A massive eel, 4 feet or more, launched upward in a sudden arc. Its body, covered in slick olive scales, writhed mid-air before slapping down across Cooper's shoulder. The impact threw him off balance, sending him to one knee in the water. Cooper screamed as a surge of electric current shot through his torso. His fingers spasmed violently, and his rifle nearly dropped. "Hold him!" Ruiz lunged, grabbing Cooper under the arm. The eel twisted off Cooper's shoulder and splashed back into the mud-churned water, charging away like a living cable. Several smaller eels followed suit, darting at the sudden movement. Their slick bodies brushed the men's submerged legs, delivering short, stinging shocks. The platoon staggered, fighting to maintain formation. O'Malley wiped mud from his eyes. "They're getting worse, Lieutenant." Harlow steadied himself as another electric jolt hit his shin. "They're agitated." The big one stirred them up. "Keep moving, tighten up." But the river wasn't finished with them. A loud splash erupted behind them. Jenkins, still shaky from nearly drowning, flinched violently as an eel bit into his thigh. The electric surge sent him jerking forward. "I can't, it's on me." Jenkins screamed, struggling to keep his head above the churning water. Ruiz shoved through the line and reached him, slapping the water hard at Jenkins's leg to scare the eel off. It worked barely. The creature uncoiled and sped off in a ribbon of brown water. The platoon regained hold of Jenkins, dragging him upright before he slipped under again. His face was ghost white now. "These things aren't just biting," Ruiz muttered. "They're trying to pull us off balance." 20 feet ahead, the far bank loomed closer, but the stakes lining the shoreline became more visible in the early light. Sharpened bamboo rising just above the waterline, calculated to catch thighs, groins, or chest of anyone charging blindly. The VC trapmakers knew exactly what they were doing. Harlow scanned the tree line again. Still no movement. They were letting the river soften up the intruders first. He forced a breath through the rising panic. "Keep your heads. Slow steps. Nobody falls behind." The river reacted again. This time, the large shadow returned right beneath the platoon. The men felt it before they saw it. A rolling wave of pressure pushed upward, tilting them off balance. The water bulged and burst as the massive eel surged through the formation, weaving between legs, whipping against bodies with brutal force. Electric jolts crackled across the water's surface. 4 men spasmed at once, barely maintaining their grip on their rifles. "Move, move now," Harlow barked. But the large eel wasn't done. It circled back, hitting the line from the rear. Private Stanley. The last man in formation gasped as the creature smashed into him. The shock knocked him fully backward, plunging him into the river. Harlow spun. Stanley. The man flailed water, thrashing violently around him, as smaller eels, frenzied by the movement, streaked toward him. He tried to stand, but the mud sucked him down. Ruiz forced his way back through the water, grabbing Stanley by the webbing of his gear. "I got him hold still, damn it." Stanley's face contorted with pain as another eel brushed past his ribs, sparking violently. Harlow shouted, "Everyone anchor, help them." Two soldiers, Cooper and Lister, locked arms with Ruiz, pulling together until Stanley's head broke the surface again, coughing and shaking. The river seemed to pulse with anger, a living trap set by nature and sharpened by enemy design. The far bank was only a dozen feet away now, but the mud was deeper. The stakes were closer. The enemy was silent, and the eels were surging again. "Bravo, Company Harlow," growled over the chaos, "push forward on my signal." The men tensed, boots, sinking weapons raised river alive beneath them. On three. The water around them rippled once more. 1. Something large brushed past Harlow's knee. 2. A crackle of electricity shivered through the formation. 3. They surged toward the bank into the final gauntlet. The moment Harlow shouted the final number, Bravo Company lunged forward, boots dragging through the mud rifles raised above the shoulder helmets, dripping river water as they surged toward the bank. But the Delta resisted with a violence that felt almost personal. The mud thickened beneath them, gripping their legs like hands. Each step required a wrenching pull just to break free. The men groaned, cursed under their breath, and pushed harder. The eels surged too. A burst of movement beneath the surface sent ripples across the water. The large eel barreled through the forming line, slamming against Ruiz's hip with a jolt that arced up through his rib cage. Ruiz staggered but held his footing jaw locked. "Keep moving," he snarled, forcing himself upright. Behind them, smaller eels darted toward the splashing legs. Some snapped their jaws against fatigues, others coiled and discharged, crackling bursts of energy that danced up the men's muscles. Lieutenant O'Malley cried, voice trembling, "They're hitting us harder." Harlow didn't look back. His focus was on the bank, on the dark outline of bamboo stakes cutting upward from the mud like a bed of fangs. Each one was slick with swamp water honed to a needlepoint. If they rushed blindly, someone would be impaled. Harlow thrust one arm out. "Slow it down, watch your footing. Stakes dead ahead." The platoon staggered to a controlled halt just short of the hidden traps. The water here was only waist deep, but the mud rose in treacherous mounds beneath their boots. Ruiz squinted into the brush on the far side. They must be waiting for us to climb out. Let the traps and the river soften us first. Harlow nodded, scanning the tree line. He sensed movement. Not obvious, just a subtle suggestion. A shadow that didn't match the wind. A leaf that didn't fall naturally. The Viet Cong were out there, watching, waiting. But the river still wasn't done. A sudden splash behind Lister made the entire squad flinch. The large eel returned this time, surging upward with a violent twist that sent a wave of water across their backs. Its body coiled around Lister's leg jaws, clamping down with a force that made him shout in agony. "Get it off!" Lister gasped, his whole body convulsing as electricity surged through the bite. Harlow lunged to him, gripping Lister's vest, while Ruiz struck downward with the butt of his rifle, breaking the eel's grip. The creature wriggled free, splashing away into the muddy swirl. Lister sagged in the water, panting. Blood seeped through his fatigues. "Stay on your feet," Harlow ordered, voice steady. "We're almost there." The men regrouped. The current shifted again, subtle, but wrong. The water pulled sideways, tugging at their legs as if something larger was sweeping by beneath the surface. Harlow sensed the shift instantly. "Eels are grouping," Ruiz said quietly, "like they're hurting us." Harlow looked him in the eye. "Then we don't give them anything else to work with." He pointed toward a narrow gap in the bamboo stakes, just a 2-foot opening between sharpened spears. A small channel where the mud dipped slightly. "That's our exit, single file. Move with control." One by one, the soldiers angled toward the gap. Cooper first, then Jenkins, then the others. Each man placed a hand on the next soldier's shoulder, forming a steady chain to avoid slipping into the spikes. As they moved, the water churned behind them, fast. Too fast. The eels were massing again, blurs of movement beneath the surface, that bumped against their legs, coiled briefly, and darted away. The large eel's shadow circled wide, tightening around them like a noose. Sir O'Malley whispered, voice shaking, "They're trying to drive us into the stakes." Harlow tightened his grip on O'Malley's shoulder. Not today. Cooper reached the gap first, lifting his foot to step onto the slick mud slope. But his boot sank deeper than expected, almost up to the ankle. He pulled hard. Nothing. "It's a soft patch," Cooper warned, struggling. "Feels like quicksand." Ruiz pushed forward. "No, it's a trap." They softened the mud to slow anyone climbing out. Movement flickered in the tree line. The faint silhouette of a rifle barrel. Harlow cursed under his breath. "Ambush incoming!" The river jolted beneath them again as shocks rippled across the formation. The eels sensed the panic and responded with another burst of frenzy. Jenkins stumbled. O'Malley shouted as something clamped around his boot. The far bank became a battlefield waiting to erupt, and Bravo Company was stuck between sharpened bamboo and the living current below. Harlow raised his voice over the chaos. "All right. Dig in your heels. Brace each other. We're getting out of this river before those rifles start talking." The platoon tensed. The eels surged. The enemy watched. Harlow pushed forward. A sliver of early sunlight finally broke through the palms, painting thin streaks of gold across the muddy surface. It should have brought relief. Instead, it revealed the danger with brutal clarity. Cooper was still stuck at the gap, one leg swallowed by the mud patch, softened deliberately by the Viet Cong. He strained face tight with panic as he tried to wrench himself free. "Don't pull straight up," Ruiz instructed, crouching beside him. "Angle back, use the heel." Cooper tried, but the mud clung like cement. His boot felt glued to the bottom of the delta. A crackle sounded behind them, the unmistakable snap of another electric discharge. O'Malley stiffened as an eel whipped past his thigh, delivering a shock that arced up his hip and clenched his jaw tight. "They're right under us again," O'Malley gasped. "No more delays," Harlow barked. "Ruiz, pull him out." Ruiz hooked both arms under Cooper's armpits and pulled. The mud bulged, sucking noisily before finally giving way. Cooper crashed backward into Ruiz, nearly knocking him off balance, but both remained upright. "Move him through the gap," Harlow ordered. The rest of Bravo Company tightened up, forming a wall around the vulnerable pair as they worked through the narrow opening between the bamboo stakes. Cooper's freed boot sloshed against the mud, and he stumbled up the small incline toward the vegetation. Then the tree line came alive, a glint of metal, a shifting leaf, a silhouette rising behind tall reeds. "Contact," Ruiz shouted. The first shot cracked through the air, high velocity, sharp, and dangerously close. The bullet hissed past Harlow's helmet, cleaving a strand of nipa palm behind him. "Take cover," he yelled, pushing men toward the bank. The river erupted in splashes of panic. Men ducked low, raising rifles high as they fought the mud and the creatures below. The Viet Cong opened fire with short-controlled bursts, AK-47s and a lone Type 56 carbine, their muzzle flash barely visible through the brush. The platoon was trapped chest-deep in the river, shock-stung and half-immobilized by mud, while the enemy enjoyed dry ground and concealed firing positions. Harlow could almost feel the ambushers' confidence. They expected Bravo Company to freeze to falter, to get pinned down by fear and eels and mud. But Bravo Company didn't freeze. Ruiz returned fire, first snapping controlled shots into the foliage. Suppressing, he shouted. Cooper and Lister, scrambling up the bank, dropped behind a fallen palm trunk and added their own fire, short bursts to keep the enemy's heads low. Jenkins, limping but determined, braced himself against a tree root and engaged the tree line with precision that belied his trembling hands. O'Malley struggled up after them, one eel still clinging to his soaked pant leg. He kicked hard, sending it flying off before diving behind a cluster of exposed roots. Harlow stayed at the edge of the river, stabilizing the last men moving through the gap. Bullets splintered bamboo inches above his head, but he didn't flinch. "Move, move now," he commanded. Two more soldiers squeezed through the narrow gap, each stepping carefully to avoid plunging into the concealed stakes. The mud grabbed at them, but the men behind pushed, hauling them forward. The large eel surged again. It slammed into Private Stanley's legs, wrapping around one knee. The shock sent him collapsing sideways, straight toward a cluster of submerged bamboo spikes. Stanley Harlow lunged, catching the back of the man's vest. The eel's current arced through both men, jolting Harlow's arm, but he held firm. Ruiz noticed. Lieutenant fall back. But Harlow didn't move. He pulled Stanley upright, dragging him clear of the concealed stakes. The eel let go, flashing away into the murky depths. A burst of gunfire tore into the river behind them, kicking up columns of water. Enemy fire was getting more accurate. They'd adjusted to the counterfire. "Everyone through the gap," Harlow roared. "Now!" His voice cut clean through the chaos. The men obeyed. One after another, Bravo Company forced through the trap boots, slipping rifles, sputtering water, as they reached dry ground and found cover. Ruiz leaned out from behind a palm trunk. "Lieutenant, move your ass, we'll cover." Harlow took one last look at the river, the writhing shadows, the frenzied currents, the unseen shapes circling with predatory patience. He stepped toward the gap, and the largest eel rose straight up beside him. 4 feet of muscle, a maw ringed with teeth, a body crackling with stored current. It lunged. Harlow twisted, throwing up his arm to shield his throat. The eel's jaws snapped shut inches from his face, discharging a violent burst of electricity that jolted his entire body. He staggered. Ruiz shouted, "Lieutenant." Harlow swung the butt of his rifle sideways with a grunt. The blow caught the eel mid-body, knocking it off course. It splashed back into the water, disappearing with a furious twist. Harlow didn't wait. He forced his legs through the mud, dragging himself up the incline, slipping once, but catching a root before falling back. Another burst of AK fire stitched through the water behind him. He dove behind the nearest tree trunk as Ruiz grabbed his vest and yanked him fully onto the bank. The river roared behind them. Gunfire cracked ahead. And Bravo Company braced for the fight they'd been forced into. Harlow drew breath steady and cold. "Everyone," he said, raising his rifle, lay down fire and pushed them out of those trees. The ambush wasn't done, and neither were they. Bravo Company fanned out behind the riverbank's tangle of roots and fallen palms, forming a rough firing line. Mud dripped from their uniforms, smoke poured from their weapons, and their breaths came in tight bursts. But they were out of the river. The living current no longer dragged at their legs, no longer surged, with biting, sparking predators beneath them. Now the fight was on solid ground. Ruiz pointed toward a cluster of reeds 30 meters ahead. "Movement, right flank. At least 3, possibly more." Harlow wiped river water from his eyes, then braced his M16 against the trunk of a leaning palm. Cooper Jenkins left side pinned them down. "Lister, take the high route and cover our advance." The men moved with practiced precision despite their trembling muscles. Eel bites throbbed beneath their fatigues, electric shocks lingered in numb limbs, yet adrenaline pushed them into action. Enemy fire cracked again from the tree line. Bark shredded from a trunk inches above O'Malley's helmet. He ducked lower, gritted his teeth, and returned a burst. The Viet Cong attackers weren't numerous, Harlow could tell by the rhythm and angle of fire, but they were entrenched, firing from dugouts, camouflaged with palm fronds and wet leaves. The perfect ambush spot for soldiers forced out of the river in single file. But Bravo Company had clawed their way through worse. Ruiz, Harlow shouted, "You're with me! We flank left!" Ruiz nodded sharply. "On your lead." The two men broke from cover, moving low across the wet ground boots, slipping on mud-slick ferns. They weaved through mangrove roots as bullets snapped overhead. Behind them, Cooper and Lister laid down suppressive fire, chewing up the brush with controlled bursts. Ruiz slid beside a fallen log, peered over, and whispered, "Two ahead. Maybe three. They're reloading." Harlow didn't hesitate. "Push!" They advanced together. A Viet Cong fighter rose from behind a mound of brush rifle, ready only to meet Harlow's shot before he could sight properly. He fell back silently. Another attacker lunged from the side, firing blindly. Ruiz tackled him into the dirt, wrenching the rifle away before driving an elbow into the man's temple. More shapes shifted deeper in the foliage. A retreat. "They're pulling back," Ruiz shouted. "Bravo," Harlow called to the men behind them. "Advance, keep pressure." The platoon surged forward from their scattered positions. Jenkins covered their rear, wincing with every step, but refusing to fall out of formation. O'Malley kept to Harlow's flank, his breathing ragged, but controlled eyes sharp despite the lingering shock twisting through his nerves. A final burst of AK fire erupted from a clump of thick reeds. Cooper and Lister swung together, firing into the source. The gunfire abruptly ceased. For several seconds, silence poured over the tree line like a shroud. Then the jungle finally fell still. Harlow lifted a clenched fist halt. Bravo Company froze panting, listening, watching. The only remaining sounds were the distant call of birds disturbed by the conflict, the dripping of water from soaked fatigues, and the soft hiss of the river, slowly calming now that the men had left its depths. Ruiz exhaled hard. "That's it. They're gone." But Harlow didn't relax. He scanned the brush one more time, then turned back toward the river, the churning, muddy water that had nearly swallowed them whole. Private Stanley sat on a root, clutching his knee. His face was still pale. O'Malley sank beside him, shaking his head. "Sir, those things in the water, I've never seen anything like that." "You weren't imagining it," Ruiz muttered, rubbing the welt on his hip. "Those were swamp eels. Big ones, mean ones. Some of the locals said they can jolt harder than a radio battery." Harlow nodded slowly. "Whether they're electric or just aggressive, they damn near turned that river into a death trap." He stepped closer to the waterline, watching as the ripples smoothed out as if nothing had happened. The eels had vanished back into the mud, silent, unseen, waiting for the next unlucky intruder to drop into their world. Behind him, the platoon regrouped, wounded, tended weapons, cleared formation, restored. They were battered, bitten, bruised, and shaken, but they were alive. Lieutenant Cooper said with a weary smirk, "If anyone asks what slowed us down, you want to tell them, or should I?" Harlow gave him a sidelong glance. "You think command's going to believe we fought off an eel battalion?" The men chuckled, weak, exhausted, but genuine. Even Jenkins managed to grin. Ruiz clapped a hand on Harlow's shoulder. "Sir, that was hell." Harlow inhaled the thick, humid air of the Delta, then tightened the straps on his helmet. "Yeah," he said quietly, "but we're still moving. Bravo Company isn't done." He turned from the river, raising his rifle, as he signaled the platoon to form up. "On me," he commanded. "We've got a rendezvous to make." The men stood boots squelching and fell into position. One last look at the water. Then the jungle swallowed them again.